Hello, everybody, and welcome back to ASMR Radio. I didn't do a very good job of introducing myself last week. My name is Danielle, and I will be the host here. The reason why I called this ASMR Radio is because the idea was that I would offer up videos with no video, just sound, and that sounded like a really great idea. But after just one video, I know it is really not what people want, so I've decided to have actual video, and we will keep the lights turned very low. We aren't going to be overly produced about things. We're really just going to enjoy ourselves and really get back to the basics of ASMR and enjoy nice sounds and hopefully get better sleep out of it. If you do want to listen to these videos without the video in it, then you can go over to the ASMR Radio podcast. I will have it linked in the description box below. If that's more your speed, or you want to watch it without potential ad interruptions or light pollution, or you want to be able to download it and listen to it on the go, then that is definitely an option. So for today, we are going to read a book together. I thought it would be fun, since I love romance novels and I really enjoy reading before bed, that I would read you guys a few chapters out of a book I picked up today. So this is a Harlequin Presents book. I picked it up from the thrift store, which is a really good place to get these kind of like little saucy novels. This one is called Shake's Forbidden Conquest. It's by USA Today best-selling author Chantel Shaw. So I have not read this book yet, and I thought this one in particular looked good. There was a whole collection of them on the shelf at the thrift store, but this was the one that sounded most appealing, just judging by its cover. So I can't vouch for what's in here. It may not be the most appealing book. It may not appeal to your values. However, this is just meant to be a calm, relaxing read. I don't really expect you to pay attention to the words or anything, but we are going to get into it. So, we are going to start right from the beginning, and we will see how far we get. This book was published in 2015, so it's not that old, but that's pretty old for romance novels. I think this one verges more on the erotic novel category, but I'm not quite sure. So we'll see. Chapter 1. What lunatic decided to go sailing in this atrocious weather? Lexi muttered into her headset as she piloted the Coast Guard rescue helicopter over the south coast of England and out across the Solent. The narrow strait which separated the mainland from the Isle of Wight was a popular area for water sports, and on a summer's day, when the sea was calm and blue, it was an idyllic sight to watch the yachts skim across the water with their with their sails tugging in the breeze. But October had blown in on a series of ferocious storms that had swept away the last remnants of summer and whipped the sea into mountainous waves which crashed against the chalk cliffs, spewing foam high into the air. The white horses reared up in the glare of the helicopter's searchlight, but Lexi knew that an even greater threat lay beneath the sea's surface, where dangerous currents eddied and swirled, ready to drag the unwary and unwise down into the net depths. She heard the co-pilot, Gavin's response through her headphones. The yacht, which has made an emergency call for assistance, was competing in a race. Apparently, the skipper thought they would be able to run ahead of the storm, but they've hit a sandbank and the boat is taking in water. Lexi swore beneath her breath. The skipper took a dangerous gamble to win a race. Geez, I love the male ego. To be fair, the storm is stronger than the Met Office predicted. The complex tidal patterns of the Solent have caught out many experienced sailors. The problem is that too many sailors don't have enough experience and fail to appreciate how unpredictable and dangerous this sea can be. Like the man on holiday with his son who we were called to assist 2 days ago, the boy was only 10 years old. He didn't stand a chance when their boat started to sink in rough seas. We did all we could, Gavin reminded her. Yeah, but we couldn't save the boy. He was just a kid with his whole life in front of him. What a bloody waste. Lexi struggled to bring her emotions under control and concentrated on flying the helicopter in the strong wind and driving rain. She prided herself on her professionalism. The first rule of working for the rescue service was not to allow your mind to linger on past events. Even something as traumatic as the death of a child, but to move on and deal with the next incident. The Mayday call confirmed that the 3 males on the yacht are all wearing life jackets, but they're unlikely to survive for long in these rough seas. The skipper reported that he has received a head injury, but he insisted that he wants his crewmen to be rescued first. It's a bit late for him to be concerned for his crew now. It's a pity he didn't take their safety into account earlier and abort the race. Lexi constantly moved her gaze between the flight instrument panel and the window to scan the wild waves. 3 massive chalk stacks, known as the Needles, rose out of the sea like jagged teeth. The famous landmark was iconic, but the strong currents around the rocks could be treacherous. An orange glow suddenly flashed in the sky. Did you see the flare? Gavin peered through the windscreen as Lexi took the chopper lower. A few moments later, he gave out another shout. I've got a visual on your right-hand side. Lexi spotted the yacht and it had been tipped onto its side by the strong sea swell. She could make out 3 figures clinging to the rigging. She kept the helicopter hovering in position as Gavin went to the rear of the aircraft and prepared to lower the winchman, who was a paramedic, into the stricken vessel. The buffeting wind made Lexi's job almost impossible, but she was a highly experienced pilot and had flown Chinook helicopters over the deserts of Afghanistan. A cool head and nerves of steel had been necessary when she had been a member of the RAF, and those qualities were required for her job on the Coast Guard Rescue Agency. She spoke to the paramedic over the radio. "Chris, once you're aboard the vessel, remind the crew that the Coast Guard Agency are in charge of the rescue and everyone is to follow your orders, including the skipper. If his head injury looks serious, we'll winch him up first, whether he likes it or not. This is not the time for him to decide he wants to be a hero," she said sardonically. Okay, on to chapter 2. The searing pain that felt as though Kadir's skull had been split open with an axe was the result of being hit on the head by the sail boom of the White Hawk, his brand new racing yacht that was now residing at the bottom of the sea. However, his immediate concern was not for the loss of his boat, but the welfare of his crew, who were being stretchered off the helicopter that had just landed at a hospital on the mainland. The rescue had been dramatic and just in time. Once Kadir had realized the yacht was sinking, everything had happened so quickly. He hadn't had time to feel fear, but for a few seconds he had pictured himself galloping across a golden desert on his black stallion, Baja. And his heart had ached for what would become of the kingdom his father had entrusted to him. But, like a miracle out of the dark sky, had appeared a shining light, and he had heard the distinctive whoomp whoomp of helicopter rotor blades. Kadir had flown in a helicopter many times, and he clung to the rigging of his wrecked yacht. Being battered by 40-foot waves, he had recognized the skill and bravery of the pilot flying the Coast Guard rescue chopper in the worsening gale. He knew that he and his crew had been lucky to survive. But the two young sailors who had crewed for him since the start of the race in the Canary Islands were suffering from hypothermia and were in a bad way. As Kadir watched them being wheeled across the helipad, frustration surged through him. His clothes were wet and stiff with sea salt, and the wind whipping across the helipad chilled him to his bones. He lifted a hand to his throbbing head and felt a swelling the size of an egg on his temple. The Coast Guard paramedic gave him a worried look. "Sir, please lie down on the stretcher, and one of the medical staff will take you down to the A&E department so that your injuries can be treated." "I'm fine. I can walk," Kadir said impatiently. "It's my crew who I'm concerned about. I wish you had followed my instructions and rescued them first. They got too cold because they were in the sea for so long. You should have winched them up into the helicopter before you rescued me." "I was under instructions to rescue injured casualties first, and it was obvious that you had sustained a possibly serious head injury," the paramedic explained. "My crew were my responsibility," Kadir argued. He was interrupted by another voice. "I hardly think you are in a position to question the professional judgment of a member of the Coast Guard team when it was your poor judgment in deciding to sail in atrocious weather that put your crew in danger." Frowning, Kadir turned towards the person who had jumped down from the helicopter cockpit. Like the other members of the rescue team, the figure was wearing a bulky jumpsuit, but as they removed their flight helmet, Kadir's confusion grew. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Flight Captain Lexi Howard. I was in charge of the rescue operation. The helicopter crew acted under my instructions, which were to winch up injured casualties first." You're a woman." The instant the words left his lips, Kadir realized he had made a crass fool of himself. There was a crowd of people standing on the helipad, medical staff and a team of firemen who were required to be present whenever a helicopter landed at the hospital, and everyone fell silent and stared at him. He could blame his shocked reaction to the female helicopter pilot on his recent trauma of nearly drowning, and also on the fact that despite the new laws and policy changes he was gradually trying to introduce, gender equality was still a relatively new concept in his country, the isolated desert kingdom of Zenab. But it was obvious from the pilot's icy expression that any excuse Kadir might offer for his tactless comment would not be well received. "Full marks for observation," the flight captain said dryly. "If the fact that I'm a woman bothers you so much, I could always drop you back in the sea where I found you and your crew." The reminder of the two injured sailors reignited Kadir's sense of frustration that he was not in charge of the situation. He was used to making decisions and having them obeyed without question, and he was struggling to accept that in this instance the female flight captain was in control. It didn't help matters that his head felt as if it was going to explode. He gritted his teeth, fighting the nausea that threatened to overwhelm him and destroy what was left of his dignity. As the yacht skipper, it was my duty to ensure the safety of my crew, he insisted. I was in a better position to judge their physical condition than you were, and I could see that they were both exhausted. It was my duty to ensure the safety of all the casualties in need of rescue, as well as the safety of my flight crew. The flight captain said coldly, "How dare you question my authority?" How dare he? No one had ever dared to address Kadir with such insolence, least of all a woman. And certainly not in public. The knowledge that he was indebted to this self-assured young woman for saving his life made him feel emasculated. The fact that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen only made him feel worse. In the nightclubs and casinos, the playgrounds across Europe of the rich and bored, Kadir had met countless beautiful women, and in his youth he had betted more of them than he cared to remember. For the past decade he had lived his life in the fast lane and played hard, but at 32 he felt jaded. It was a long time since his curiosity had been aroused by a woman, but Flight Captain Lexi Howard intrigued him. Beneath the floodlights on the helipad, her complexion was flawless, and so fair that the skin stretched over her high, slanting cheekbones was almost translucent. Her long braid of ash-blonde hair suggested possible Nordic ancestry, and the impression was further enhanced by her light blue eyes that reminded Kadir of the cool, clear skies above the Swiss Alps where he skied every winter. He found he could not look away from her, and he felt a sudden tightness in his chest, as if a fist had gripped his heart. Heat surged through his veins. He tried to convince himself that the fire inside him was a natural response after his recent brush with death. But deep in his core, something hot and hungry stirred. "Surely you checked the Met Office shipping forecast and realized that a storm was approaching." Lexi glared at the yacht skipper, infuriated that he'd had the cheek to criticize how the rescue operation had been carried out. She guessed he was an inexperienced sailor, and his failure to respond to the worsening weather conditions had compromised the safety of his crew. Her mind flew back to the incident the Coast Guard helicopter had attended 2 days ago, and the young boy they had been unable to save. Not every rescue can be successful, the Coast Guard station commander had reminded Lexi at the debriefing afterwards. Part of the job is to accept that you can't save everyone. Lexi's RAF commanding officer of the Medical Emergency Rescue Team in Afghanistan had said the same thing. Many of the things she had seen, the terrible injuries received by soldiers caught in landmine explosions and sniper fire, had been harrowing. But if she had gone to pieces, she wouldn't have been able to do her job. The same was true working for the Coast Guard. Her common sense told her she must not allow one tragedy to haunt her, but in her heart she had taken the failure to save the boy hard. The tragedy 2 days ago and the incident today could have been avoided if the yacht skipper in each case had acted more responsibly. She thought grimly. She was tempted to tell the man standing in front of her what she thought of him, but something about him made her swallow her angry words. Despite his disheveled appearance and the large purple swelling above his right eye, he had an aura of power about him that set him apart from other men. He was looking at Lexi in a way that no man had looked at her for a long time. Too long. The treacherous thought slid into her mind. She tried to push it away, but a picture flashed into her mind, and the man's strong, tanned hands on her body, dark against pale, hard muscle pressed against soft, yielding flesh. Shocked by her wayward imagination, she narrowed her eyes to hide her thoughts as she studied him. He was sinfully attractive with exotic olive gold skin and ever-long, thick black hair that curled at his nape and fell forward into his brow so that he raked it back with an impatient flick of his hand. Lexi's gaze was drawn to his dark brown eyes, liquid pools of chocolate fringed by ridiculously long, silky lashes and set beneath heavy black brows. The gleam in his eyes unsettled her, and the blatantly sexual curve of his lips made her wonder how it would feel if he pressed his mouth against hers. She shook her head, trying to break free from the disturbing effect he had on her. Praying he hadn't noticed that she had been staring at him, she did not understand her reaction to him. It had been a long time since she had looked at a man and felt a quiver in her belly. Too long, she acknowledged ruefully. You should have waited for the weather to improve instead of putting your life and the lives of your crew at risk. She spoke sharply, desperate to hide her confusing awareness of the yacht skipper. Your behavior was irresponsible. Offshore sailing is not for inexperienced sailors. The man arrogantly threw back his head, drawing Lexi's attention to his broad shoulders. She assessed him to be several inches over 6 feet tall. I am not a fool, he said curtly. Of course I checked the marine forecast. I was aware of the storm. The White Hawk could easily have run ahead of the bad weather, but we must have hit something in the water that ripped the keel from the hull and resulted in the yacht capsizing. He broke off abruptly, following the direction of his gaze. Lexi saw 2 men hurrying towards him. The helipad was strictly out of bounds to the public, but as she stepped forward to ask the men to leave, they halted in front of the White Hawk skipper, and to Lexi's astonishment bowed to him. She had learned enough Arabic during her tours of duty in the Middle East to recognize the language they spoke. After a brief conversation with the men, the skipper swung away from Lexi without giving her another glance and strode across the helipad, followed by his two companions. A word of thanks for saving his life would have been nice, she said disgustedly, not caring if her words carried across the helipad to him. She glanced at the Coast Guard paramedic. Did you see how those men bowed to him as if they were his servants? He actually clicked his fingers for them to follow him. Who the hell does he think he is? Chris gave her an amused look. I take it from the way you ripped into him, you didn't recognize him? That was His Royal Highness, Sultan Qadir al-Sulamar of Zanab. I apologize for any mispronunciations. I don't regularly speak some of these words, and I don't know how they would be pronounced. And I'm guessing that the men who came to collect him are his servants. Not only is he a sultan, he was the skipper of the Zanab Team Valiant, who won the America's Cup in the summer. He grinned at Lexi's startled expression. I got the feeling that he didn't take kindly to you calling him an inexperienced sailor. I still think he was irresponsible to have sailed when he knew that a storm was coming, Lexi argued. But yet I guess he could have known his yacht's keel. But I guess he couldn't have known his yacht's keel would fail, she conceded reluctantly. She knew enough about sailing to be aware that catastrophic keel failure was uncommon but not unheard of, and it was the main cause of yachts capsizing quickly, giving the crew little warning or time to radio for assistance. She winced as she remembered how she had accused the man of being an inexperienced sailor. Now that she thought about it, he had seemed vaguely familiar. She mused as she climbed into the helicopter cockpit and prepared to take off from the helipad. During the summer, there had been extensive news coverage of the famous America's Cup yacht race held in San Francisco when the Zanabian Team Valiant had beaten Team USA to win the prestigious trophy. Sultan Qadir al-Sulamar had been interviewed on live television by an overexcited female presenter who had clearly been overwhelmed by his exotic looks and undeniable charm. Lexi told herself that it wasn't surprising that she had failed to recognize the Sultan when he had been battered, bruised, and dripping wet after being rescued from his sinking yacht. To her annoyance, she could not stop thinking about him. At the end of her shift, she went back to the old Coast Guard cottage that had been her home for the past year. But instead of finishing packing up her belongings, ready to move out, she wasted an hour looking up Sultan Qadir al-Sulamar on her laptop. She had no trouble finding pictures of him, mostly taken at social events in Europe. He was invariably accompanied by a beautiful woman, blonde, brunette, or redhead. It seemed that the Sultan had no particular preference. But from the dizzying number of different women he was photographed with, it appeared that he liked variety. According to the press reports, he was a playboy with a personal fortune estimated to be in the billions. He owned a luxury chalet in St. Moritz, penthouses in New York and London's Mayfair, and an English countryside estate where he kept racehorses. There was some information about the country he ruled. Zanab was an independent Arab kingdom. Zanab was an independent Arab kingdom in the Arabian Sea. Qadir had succeeded his father, Sultan Khalif al-Sumar, who was credited with establishing peace in Zenab after years of fighting between rival tribal groups. But while the previous sultan had rarely traveled abroad or courted the attention of the world's media, his son was frequently spotted by the paparazzi at nightclubs in Paris or at Ascot, where he owned a private box and entertained celebrities and members of the British royal family, or driving his attention-grabbing scarlet sports car around Belgravia. In short, the spoiled sultan was the absolute antithesis of the kind of man Lexi admired. When she had served in Afghanistan, she had met men who were brave and loyal and utterly dedicated to carrying out the missions they had been assigned, even though their lives were often at risk. The memory of how the sultan had looked at her with a predatory gleam in his eyes slid into her mind, and her stomach muscles clenched. Sexual attraction followed its own rules and ignored common sense, she thought, ruefully. Or maybe it was just her body reminding her that it was perfectly normal for a 29-year-old woman to feel sexual desire. It was over a year since she had broken up with Stephen, or to be more precise, since he'd been informed. It was over a year since she had broken up with Stephen, or to be more precise, since he'd informed her in a text message hours before their engagement party that he couldn't marry her because he had a girlfriend and a baby daughter who he had failed to mention when he and Lexi had grown close while they had been stationed together at Camp Bastion. Rejection hurt as much at 28 as it had when she had been 18 or 8. Lexi had discovered. She had dealt with Stephen's betrayal the same way she had dealt with all the disappointments in her life, by pretending that she did not give a damn and hiding her feelings that had proved too often that people were unreliable. Perhaps the women in the newspaper photographs, clinging like limpets to the Sultan of Zenab, had the right idea, she brooded. At least, if you were a playboy's mistress, you would have no expectations that he might commit to the relationship or fall in love with you. And no doubt, the sex was amazing. As Lexi visualized Sultan Qadir al-Sulamar's arrogantly handsome face, heat unfurled in the pit of her stomach. She would never be tempted to sacrifice her hard-won pride and self-respect for 5 minutes in the sexy sultan's bed, she assured herself. An hour on the treadmill, followed by a brisk shower, left her physically spent. But when she flopped into bed, she was kept awake by the memory of the sensual promise in his molten chocolate eyes. Two days later, Lexi donned her Coast Guard agency uniform for the last time, checked the gold buttons on her jacket were gleaming, and adjusted her cap before she walked into the station commander's office. "I'm sorry to lose you," Roger Norris told her. "You've done a fantastic job over the past year." "I'm sorry to go," Lexi said honestly. "I'm going to miss everyone on the team, but I knew when I came here that the contract for a second helicopter pilot was only for 1 year. The number of rescues you have carried out has proved the need for a second rescue helicopter, but unfortunately the funding for the Coast Guard agency has been cut." Roger's frown cleared. "However, I have received a piece of good news. A private donor has offered to pay for a permanent second helicopter and crew. The details will still have to be ironed out over the next few months, But if the offer goes ahead, would you be interested in resuming your role of flight captain?" Lexi's eyebrows rose. "I'd certainly consider it. Whoever the private donor is must be very wealthy." "He's a billionaire by all accounts. You met him 2 nights ago," Roger chuckled. "Although I heard from Gavin and Chris that you didn't recognize him. In fact, you're the reason that Sultan Khazir Zanab has made his incredibly generous offer after you rescued him and his crewmen from his capsized yacht. He has asked to see you so that he can thank you personally. He's staying in the Queen Mary suite at the Admiralty Hotel and requested for you to meet him there at 6 o'clock this evening." Lexi's heart collided painfully with her ribs at the mention of the Sultan. She flushed as she recalled the shockingly erotic dreams she'd had about him for the past 2 nights. She was behaving like a schoolgirl with a crush on a member of a boy band, she thought disgustedly. "I'm afraid it won't be possible for me to meet him," she told Roger. "I'm going to my sister's engagement party this evening, and it's a couple hours' drive to Henley, where Athena's fiancé's parents live. Can't Chris or Gavin go instead of me?" Roger shook his head. "Chris is on duty, Gavin is at the hospital with Kate, and it looks as though her labor pains aren't a false alarm this time. Anyway, the Sultan particularly asked to see you. I'll be honest, Lexi, it is vital that the Coast Guard agency secures his donation. This part of the South Coast is a busy area for shipping, and the rescue service needs a second helicopter. Perhaps you could phone the hotel and arrange to meet His Highness this afternoon instead of this evening. It might also be a good idea to apologize to him. I understand that you had a heated exchange of words with him the other night." Lexi frowned at the reminder that she had behaved less than professionally when she had argued with the skipper of the capsized yacht, unaware that he was the Sultan of Zanab and an experienced sailor. But the Coast Guard commander's words tugged on her conscience. The Sultan's offer to make permanent funds available for a second helicopter was astonishingly generous and could mean the difference between life and death for accident victims on the South Coast who need to be urgently transferred to hospital. She stood up. "I suppose I could stop off at the Admiralty Hotel and meet him before I drive up to the party," she said reluctantly. "Good. And Lexi, be nice to him." She turned in the doorway and gave Roger a puzzled look. "I'm always nice, aren't I?" "Certainly," the commander smiled, "but you can be intimidating. You have an outstanding war record and demonstrated your exceptional bravery, both in the RAF and as a civilian rescue pilot. Sometimes people, men especially, are in awe of you." Lexi visualized the Sultan of Zanab's haughty features and gave a snort. She couldn't imagine his high and mightiness had ever felt intimidated. Driving back to the cottage, Roger's comment played on her mind. Did people really find her intimidating? She had always been a popular member of her RAF squadron, and since coming to work for the Coast Guard agency, she'd quickly established her place in the team. The guys treated her as one of them, yet she sensed a faint reservation in their attitude. She thought it was because she was the only female rescue pilot, but it had been the same when she had been at boarding school. She'd got on well with the other girls, but she'd never made close friendships. She telephoned the Admiralty Hotel, and when a vague-sounding receptionist told her that the Sultan was unavailable to take her call, she left a message explaining that she could meet him at 5 o'clock rather than 6. The rest of the day was spent packing up her car with bags and boxes. Closing the door of the cottage for the last time, she felt an unexpected pang. After 10 years in the RAF, constantly moving to wherever in the world her squadron was deployed, she had enjoyed making the cottage into a home, even though it had not been the home she had imagined she would share with Stephen. He had talked about them buying a house together. They had even visited an estate agent to discuss the kind of property they wanted, Lexi remembered. Just for a while, she had bought into the daydream of a happy marriage, children, a family that was truly her own, and a sense of belonging. After a lifetime of feeling that she did not belong anywhere, she should have guessed it was too good to be true. Stephen's betrayal had reminded her of the sense of rejection she had felt when her parents had made it obvious that they preferred their own daughter, Athena, who had been born to them a year after they adopted Lexi. At 5 minutes to 5, Lexi walked across the foyer of the Admiralty Hotel, praying that she would not slip in her stiletto heels on the polished marble floor. Usually she lived in jeans and running trainers, but because she was on a tight schedule, she had changed into a black silk jersey dress that was suitable for a cocktail party and wouldn't crease while she was sitting in the car. The hotel receptionist looked flustered as she dealt with a coach party of tourists who had just arrived. Lexi checked in the lounge and the bar, but there was no sign of the Sultan. She glanced at her watch and decided she would have to take charge of the situation. Abandoning the idea of trying to catch the receptionist's attention, she walked over to the lift and asked the porter for directions to the Queen Mary suite.